How do tech companies make new things? And does this process differ if you're in a tiny startup versus in a tech giant like Google? Listen to this episode to find out. Welcome to the Tech for Non-Techies podcast. I'm your host, tech entrepreneur, executive coach, and Chicago Booth MBA, Sophia Matveeva. My aim here is to help you have a great career in the digital age. In a time when even your coffee shop has an app, you simply have to speak tech. On this podcast, I share core technology concepts, help you relate them to business outcomes, and most importantly, share practical advice on what you can do to become a digital leader today. If you want to have a great career in the digital age, this podcast is for you. Hello, smart people. How are you today? You are in for a treat because you're going to learn from somebody who works on a product that many of you use. Maria Fernandez Guajardo is the Senior Director of Product Management for Gmail at Google, and she's a leading innovator at the company. So this is why I have brought her to you. Maria and I talked about how to bring new tech products to life and how to innovate at a corporate and how to actually be in a position, how to get yourself in a position where somebody lets you innovate. What surprised me in this conversation are the similarities that Maria brought up between innovation in a huge tech company and innovation in a startup. And there are big differences, which I really don't want to gloss over because some people, I think, just say they're basically the same thing, and they are really not. But the similarities that Maria talked about might surprise you too, so I'll be quite curious what you think. So whether you're in the startup world or if you want to be a senior leader in a tech giant, this episode is for you. And my dear smart person, if you enjoy this episode, please leave the show a rating and a review. It warms my heart. I love hearing from you, and also your reviews really help other smart people like you find this show. And now, let's learn from Maria. Maria, I have a question for you. What do milkshakes have to do with technology?
Other than that, we like them and we eat them like a synergy through the day. I think that we talked about milkshakes in the content of technology because we were talking about minimal viable products or MVPs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And an MVP is something, it's a product, it's an early version of your product that you build to test hypotheses as quickly as fast as you can. And the reason you do that is because people usually have a hard time to give you feedback on an idea in an abstract context. And you need to present your products in use. And there's a great story about milkshakes and McDonald's that exemplifies this. This is one of the examples that appears in the book Competing Against Luck by Clayton Christensen. And the story of the milkshakes is that, McDonald's saw a little bit of like a rise of sales of milkshakes. And obviously it's like, oh, there's something here. Let's go and let's do more desserts. Let's do more sweets. And that didn't work. And what Competing Against Luck explains is the framework jobs to be done, which is what is the real motivation of people to use your products? And what McDonald's did with their milkshakes is that they did a lot of research to really understand who were the people buying these milkshakes, in which context they were having their milkshakes. And what they found out is that people were buying those milkshakes through their commutes. For themselves and for their kids in the car. Okay, maybe it's not the perfect snack for the kids, but okay. But they were buying them, and the reason why they were buying milkshakes and not other sweets were actually working is because they needed something that didn't create a mess in the car, and that it lasted long enough for their commute. So actually, they were hiring these milkshakes to entertain them in a way through that commute. Once McDonald's had this knowledge, they were able to create different flavors of milkshakes, different consistencies, different products that met the characteristics of this. That's why we build MVPs and we test them with real users in real time. So we actually get the context. Another example that I really like is, Sophia, if I ask you on January 1st, how is going to be your gym routine and how often
fantastic.
It's going to be fantastic.
Yeah,
how often are you going to go?
6 days a week, one rest day. like an athlete,
Exactly.
like a pro.
Exactly. And then what's reality is that, your real life really comes into the picture. And, you have meetings and you have to drop your kids and you're stressed and you don't feel good. And then you end up not going. So this is why as product manager, as technologists, you have to be extremely worried, when you show a mock or when you show slides of like, this is an idea that we have, this is we're thinking about this, because the feedback is going to be extremely positive. Most of the cases. Nobody wants to tell you in your face that your baby is ugly, number one. Number two, people, it's not that they lie, it's that we have a really hard time to put ourselves in the context of how we're going to be using the things. And we have a hard time to really express our deep needs and wants of the product. So that's why in technology, this concept of having an MVP, which is your minimum version that you can possibly put together as fast as you can, that can test your assumptions of why your product matters as fast as possible, is being very common right now in technology, and a lot of companies use it.
So I want to clarify, how does that idea of jobs to be done from Clayton Christensen, how does that relate to the MVP?
Yeah, so on the jobs to be done, you really understand what is the motivation that your product, that the users have to use your product. So that is like, usually say my product got hired to do X job, like because there is a willingness to use and a willingness to pay for something that you are hiring for that. When you understand what is the customer actually trying to do, there's two things that happens. One is that you really understand the core value proposition. The core value proposition has to be in the MVP if you really want to really have the feedback that you want. And second of all, if you really understand the deep motivations and the, a little bit like more subjective needs when they're doing their job, you can do a better user design of that product. Like, for example, imagine you are like an accountant or something like that. Like accountants, imagine they have this personality where they love to get things done. Check, 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 check. So you can also see, they have this sense of accomplishments when they do, imagine that you are designing software to get, to track their accounting. I mean, I don't know much about accounting, but just for the sake of it. So because their need is to check, 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 they'll have a great sense of accomplishment if when they do something in your software, you show that has been done. It's like, oh, I feel so much better. Like I have done the checklist that I needed to do. So small things like that. What's driving people to do the things they do, and make sure that your core value proposition is in the MVP, but also their deep wants and needs are.
And I think it's really important for people who are creating products to understand that there are different jobs to be done within the same thing. So, for example, let's look at a handbag. You can get something from Target for $20, or you can get something from Chanel for $10,000. And both of them do the obvious job of carrying something from A to B. But why is, Chanel is clearly a successful company. So clearly people are buying these bags and buying these items that actually they could get for much less. It's because there is another job to be done, a psychological job to be done. So maybe it's showing to yourself that now you've made it. Maybe it's showing to your sister that, finally your career has gone well and hers hasn't. Whatever that need is, but there is another need. And we can also see that in technology. So don't think that just because you're creating a product, and even if it's a tech product or, whether it's a tech product or not, there is the very obvious job to be done, but then there is the psychological job to be done, and both are really, really important. And so when people are thinking about creating a minimum viable product, how minimum should it be?
Yeah. This is one of the trickiest questions of creating the MVP. Is what is the set of features, right? And we see the both spectrums, right? We talked about this in the book, in Sale to Scale. We talk about the startups mistakes, and this is one that comes really, really often, which is people oscillate between the two sides, which is they either put too much on it, too many features, and this happens very often, or they don't put enough. Let's talk about the two cases because they're both really interesting. there is a tendency to put too many features. And sometimes why that happens is that, they build a version and then they have big ambitions, which is great. We all want like big ambitions for our products and for our startups. And they think, okay, this is going to reach everybody will use it. Because everybody is an accountant at heart and everybody will use this. And you end up like trying to target everybody and you put like so many different features that it becomes really unusable for the majority of people. And you are lost. You get lost. It has other problems, which is like you start building more and more and more and more. And then it's harder and harder and harder to make iterations and pivot and like all of those things. On the other side is I'm building a minimum. I'm going to get it out there as soon as possible. And what ends up happening is that you may be missing key value proposition that is just like not going to give you the right signal. Because then what ends up happening on that case is that people don't use it, but you are left a little bit clueless of like, why? Is it because they don't like my idea, they don't like my product, or is it because they're just missing like a key part? So that balance, like what we recommend to do is like, number one, to avoid the problem of having too many features is like really to start small and have a very, very targeted segment of people that you really understand what they're trying to accomplish and how and why, back to the jobs to be done framework. And, when you understand those people, you really target it. You can always expand from there. Like try to find small cohort that really likes what you're doing. You can always go up from that. So that's one. And then on the other side is like, let's identify your key assumptions. An MVP is there to mitigate risk. Let's not forget about that. Your ideas, you don't know if your idea is a good idea. Everybody has in their heads, their ideas are great. Like, you are convinced that this is going to be the best thing. So, but they're all assumptions. And it's very easy, with confirmation bias to those assumptions in your head, turn them into facts very quickly, but they're not. They're still assumptions. So it's very important that you distance yourself from like your idea, your solution, and you really list all of the assumptions that you are making. Like, I believe that people will do X when I show them Y. Well, that's assumption. You don't know if they're going to do that. So make sure that, you list all of the assumptions that you need in order for your product to be successful. And then for each of the assumptions that you have a way in your MVP to prove it, that's one thing. And then the other thing is that you have a way to get the feedback if they use it or not. Either, in your product, you instrumentalize it. So you have metrics that you can see like, oh yeah, they actually did that step. Or you have lineup, qualitative feedback, interviews, customer, like you're talking with customers, like a way that you can collect the feedback back. Otherwise, an MVP, which is a vehicle for learning, has no point because you haven't learned.
And this is actually where constraining your resources, or basically not having a lot of resources, is a good thing, because right now I am literally in the middle of running an accelerator on tech for non-technical founders, and we're covering MVPs, how to make an MVP. And I am seeing that, when people actually have resources because, they've got funding or they've already got a successful business, so they've got the cash to spend, arguing them out of having lots of features in an MVP is really difficult. And also because, when we have a vision of something big and we want it to be great and we want it to be really awesome and perfect. And, when somebody says, oh, you've got to slim it down, nobody wants to do that. And so there I see that actually, having money can exacerbate this problem. Whereas when I'm speaking to founders who don't yet have funding and they're not yet running a successful business that's spitting out cash flow, and so, they are kind of paying for it themselves, then actually talking to them about, okay, let's keep it really simple because you're going to have to do it yourself, or, you don't have the money to pay a lot for developers and designers. So let's just keep it really, really simple. And so I would say to people who are in corporates where you do have bigger budgets, the budget maker, if there is a CFO listening, do be the CFO at the beginning, be a bit stingy at the beginning. If it starts working, then stop being stingy and start funding it. But, resource constraints at the beginning is a really good thing to avoid feature creep. I'm wondering, now that generative AI, like everybody's talking about it, some people are disappointed with it, some people think it's changing the world, but everybody's got an opinion. So when it comes to creating something new for the first time, is generative AI relevant here?
So I feel, we have seen, an explosion, right? With the technology, like everybody jumping in and creating new products. And we see this like without every new technology, there's a lot of this boom. And then there's like a return, kind of like return to normal.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing is like the mistakes that people do during this boom, it's like, it's almost like the same, it's the same story over and over again, because you have to do like the return to normal, right? And one of the mistakes that we have seen through this cycle of AI is that, people fall in love with their solution. And this is a technology driven like, let's do everything hot Gen AI, like Gen AI here, Gen AI there, Gen AI there, like all of the possible flavors. That doesn't work, because just because something is innovative doesn't mean it's going to win. Just because something is superior doesn't mean it's going to need, because at the end of the day, what you need to do is to solve a problem for somebody. And it's back to the same core principles of like, okay, who are these people? What problems do they have? How can I help? And use the technology in the support of solving those problems, not a technology first approach to problems, which is what we actually experienced a little bit at the beginning. To entrepreneurs out there, I will say just make sure that you focus and they use generative AI to go back to the basics, which is to solve problems for people. Go use it to establish your strategy rather than just chase a new technology. So it's really going back to the basics.
Awesome. And now you are working at a massive company and you've just been giving advice to entrepreneurs, and you've got this book which is aimed at founders. So, how do you know what you're talking about? Basically, if you're at Google, they haven't been a startup for a while.
Well, I mean, I have worked at startups for a number of years, and, I work in a very innovative startup-y, like either as advisor and in other capacities in the entrepreneurial world. But I have been an intrapreneur, which is like entrepreneur inside big companies and creating new products, new business lines, like things that like out of like very different from what the existing company was doing. And what a lot of people maybe don't realize is there's a lot of more commonalities that there are differences. Yes, there are differences and we can talk about them, but there's a lot of, but I would like to address the commonalities that some people, they take them by surprise. Like, first of all, the basics are the same. You still have to find an idea. You still have to define a product, do an MVP. You still have to convince somebody that and find the way that this is going to solve the problem. And that is hard. Doesn't matter where you are. It is hard to design good products that solve existing problems, right? So that is still the same. There's another thing that is interesting, which is like, in startups, they're raising money. They have to go to VCs. Well, guess what? I also have to raise money and go to VCs, which is my leadership, because every year there's a strategic planning and, things are awarded like certain number of resources. And I have to, people who have ideas and to what to build things, they have to convince people that they know what they're talking about, that there is an opportunity, that there is a business plan, that we're going to, this is how we're going to solve this problem. And every year you have to show progress, because every year there is a reevaluation of like, where are we spending our resources and what do we do? So as having been an entrepreneur and an intrapreneur right now, it's very similar. And I take it myself very similarly, and I approach it in the same way. There are obviously differences. Like, for example, in a big company, you probably have easier distribution of get your idea, your product in front of eyeballs of like the people who are going to use it. But in a startup, you spend your time more in the go-to-market, right? Like how am I going to get this in front of people? Sales, marketing, business development. On my side, it's less about that, but it's more about internal alignment with internal stakeholders, because this thing has to fit into a bunch of other things that are there. So the skills of influencing and storytelling and strategic, like explaining why this is important. They're very similar. It's just that you're working with like different groups and different things. There's different risk tolerance. Obviously, startups have more risk tolerance. They have less assets, less things to worry about. In a big company, there is more risk. Therefore, there is potentially like more processes. You have to make sure that things are aligned. So decision making may take longer. But the other side of that coin is that in a startup, you don't have ability to do a lot of bets because you don't have the resources. You're much focused in like a single bet. So there are differences. There's some skills that you develop better in a startup and others that you develop better in a bigger company. But a lot of the things are the same. Even like when you are thinking about an exit, there's people say, oh, as a startup, like, what is my exit? What is my exit? Same thing on when you are being an entrepreneur in a big company, because when you're creating a new product, at the beginning, there's like a small team and, it's kind of like on the side and we don't know. But what is the future for that? Are you going to implement? Are you going to integrate into the bigger picture? Is that going to be integrated into the bigger team? Like, what is the plan? And as a founder or entrepreneur inside a bigger company, you also have to think about that. It's like, what's going to happen with my team? What's going to happen with this? How is this going to come together in the bigger scheme of things? So there's a lot more similarities than people think.
So would you say that, if somebody wants to be an innovator, but basically doesn't want the financial risk of not knowing how to pay their rent, that becoming a corporate innovator is a good alternative?
I love being a corporate innovator.
But how do you become one? Because I often wondered, how does somebody who basically wants to do that at a corporate, how do they, is there a job opening that says come and be a corporate innovator? Because I know some departments, some companies have innovation departments, but usually they tend to be quite small. So even big companies don't have a massive innovation team, and that's not the only place where innovation happens. And so people often ask me, okay, I want to do this. How do I go about it in a corporate?
I get asked that question a lot as well, and I have opinions. First of all, I'm not a big fan of the innovation teams, and there's this incubators, skunk words. Like, I don't think they work. They may have some cases where they have worked. I just in my experience, the majority of those things, and the reason is because they are disconnected from the actual problems of the user. They don't really. Whatever idea doesn't really go with the rest of the strategy. It's just like a little bit too much outside. So I'm not a big fan of like having a career as an innovator. I don't go out there and pitch myself as an innovator. No, I'm a product leader who solves problems for people. Now, how do you do those things? And how do you, imagine you have like an idea, and how do you get it out in a bigger company? How do you get it sponsored? So there is a lot of framework to do that. First of all, you have to understand that the timing doesn't depend on you. The timing depends on the company, but you have to be ready when the time comes, and you have to build the momentum for you.
What does that mean?
I'll tell you.
Build the momentum, yeah.
But here's the thing: you don't. I don't think that somebody goes to you and say, "Hey, you here, do this idea." That job it doesn't happen. Like, you almost have to create for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And how you do it is that, first of all, well, you come with an idea, and that comes from being curious, like understanding, like, ideas usually happen at the edges of like what people are doing. Obviously, if you go into what somebody else is doing, is like, hey, let me tell you how to do your job. That's probably not going to work. But there is a lot of overlaps and connections and holes and edges, like between the products and opportunities. So if you're curious about how your company works and how their space works, you can find those ideas. So once you have that idea, it's almost like when VCs invest in people, like sometimes we say VCs invest in people, in the founder. This is like the same thing. So how do you, with this idea, how do you get it a sponsor? You need to show passion. This is very similar to what you would do with a VC. You have to show passion. You have to show a deep understanding of the details. You cannot go and say, hey, I have an idea. Let's build a flying car. What did you know, Maria, about flying cars? You don't know anything. What are you talking about? Like, no. Here's the market. Here's the technology. Here's the thing. Like, I know my details. You have to be persistent. They're going to tell you no many times. So you have to have the grit. And also, like, as executives, sometimes when people in my team comes with ideas, I need to see that this is somebody who's going to stay with the problem until they get it done. You have to show that grit. Very similar, right? You also need to ask for help. You are not going to get this done on your own. You have to create that momentum around you with other executives, with other partners, with other people who's like, I'm starting to like see how this comes together. And the other thing, there's a couple more things. First, you have to have some wins. So you have to build a reputation. Like if you just got into a company and like, oh, I have an idea. It's like, who are you? You need to showcase and you need to prove to the people who are going to sponsor that you can be trusted and that you get things done and that you are able to this. And then the last point is that on your idea, you need to show that there are early wins, that you proof points, that, you know, the way the market is going, the way this is thing, like you are showing that you are going into the right direction. Anyway, there is, in my opinion, like being an innovator into a big company, you make it rather than they hire you for it. Because if they hire you for it, this innovation departments, in my opinion, is just like not very successful.
Interesting. Yeah, thank you very much for that framework. And it is interesting how much the steps resemble entrepreneurship. Obviously, there is a lot more risk in entrepreneurship, just, you know, frankly, financially. But in terms of, you know, building your reputation, building your network, and that actually getting a deal done takes a really long time, whether it's fundraising or, you know, a big client deal. If it's a small client deal, they tend to happen kind of more quickly. But if it's something, you know, if it's a really big client win, it's literally the same thing. The client needs to see for a long time that you can deliver the project, that you've got that team and so on and so forth. So it just seems like these are professional skills that are really useful to have. And yet it's amazing how many people kind of don't bother developing these kind of innovation skills, which I think you don't actually need to go and invent, you know, smartphones or EV electric vehicles or whatever. You don't need to go and do things at that scale. But these are fundamentally really useful professional skills, especially at a time when, you know, technology is changing so much and we all have to keep on learning new things. And also we all keep on having to have our own opinions. You know, is generative AI useful for your job or not? I don't know. It depends on the job. So when you are speaking, so actually, why don't you tell us about the book that you've written? Because you've written it with 3 people and it's aimed at entrepreneurs. And obviously you do have the background and the insight, but there are also lots of entrepreneurship books out there. So why did you decide to write another one?
We decided, so Mona, Heather, and myself, we decided to write this book because we have been in Silicon Valley for many years. The 3 of us, we have a lot of experience in startups. And it was interesting because when we were talking, so I'm more the expert, I'm more of the product expert, a lot of like new products, innovation, launches, like first phase, etc., and pivots and like iterations. Heather is more of like the CEO type of profile, a lot of scaling, pivoting, scaling companies. And Mona is really an expert on exits because and scale and exit because she actually has an advising company on startups exits. So when we are triangulating like a lot of our experiences in the entrepreneurship world, we saw so many mistakes that are connected through the journey of a startup, and we found that there was a voice missing about having been in the trenches and having gone and seen these mistakes over and over again and having clear ways to identify them and what to do about them. We thought that there was a lot of books out there who talk brilliant ideas about unicorns that probably are going to happen like once in a lifetime. That's great to read. Highly recommend. Super inspiring. There was a lot of books that they were very frameworky and very much like here's like the structure and all of that. But what we were missing were voices of people. And the book is full of stories of startups that have, been successful and failures. There's like both of them. And we wanted to make it extremely instructional and like, how can I learn to identify these things and what do I do about it? So it's very approachable. This is people who have read it. This is what they told us. It's very easy to read and very easy to understand and very like, okay, now I got the tools to do these things in my own.
I will put the link to that in the show notes. So thank you very much for joining us on Tech for Non-Techies and for sharing your insights.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Sophia.
Wasn't that interesting? I thought so. And if you did too, remember to leave this show a rating and a review wherever you get your podcast. And if you've already done that, then tell your friends. And honestly, your help is really meaningful to me. Making high quality free content for you, it is work. And so when I see you sharing this show or when I get your reviews, it just really does help us all keep going. So thank you very much in advance. Have a wonderful day, and I shall be back in your delightful smart ears next week. Ciao!